He was 18 years old when he inherited a forgotten farm and a legacy of lies. What he discovered buried beneath the floorboards wouldn't just give him a home, it would force him to reclaim his name. And if this is your first time here, finding our stories of struggle and second chances, I hope you'll consider subscribing. We're building a community for people who know what it's like to fight back from the bottom. The air on the other side of the gate tasted different. For 2 years, every breath I took had been recycled, filtered through vents and the low-grade hum of institutional machinery. It was the air of consequence, sterile and unchanging. But this air, this sharp October morning air, tasted of damp earth, exhaust fumes from the passing road, and a freedom so vast it was terrifying. The gate of the Northwood Youth Authority Center clicked shut behind me with a sound of finality, a heavy, metallic sigh that had been the soundtrack to my life since I was 16. My belongings were in a single cardboard box tucked under my arm. 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book my grandfather had given me, and a sealed manila envelope containing my release papers and a bus ticket. That was it. The sum total of my transition back into a world that had moved on without me. I was officially an adult, officially free, and officially completely alone. My social worker, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, stood by her sedan, keys jingling impatiently in her hand. She'd driven me the 2 hours from the city. Her job was done the moment my boots hit the gravel of the bus station parking lot. "Leo," she said, her voice flat, practiced. "The bus to Mill Creek leaves in 20 minutes. The ticket is in the envelope. There's a lawyer waiting for you there. Anya Sharma. She's handling your grandfather's estate." The words hung in the cold air, a statement of fact that felt like a punch. My grandfather's estate. I knew he was gone. They'd told me 6 months ago, a sterile conversation through a plexiglass divider. A heart attack, they said. Quick, peaceful. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. They said it was a security risk. I think they just didn't want to deal with the paperwork. So I grieved in a concrete room, staring at a wall, the loss a silent, heavy stone in my gut. He was the only person who had ever truly seen me. The only one who wrote letters that weren't filled with disappointment or blame. He wrote about the farm, about the stubbornness of the old tractor, about the way the light hit the hayfields in the late afternoon. He never mentioned why I was locked away. He didn't need to. He just kept a connection to the outside world alive for me. A thin, fragile thread of hope. "His estate," I finally managed to say, my voice raspy from disuse. I thought there wasn't much. He had always lived simply. The farm was old, the house needed work. He sold a little hay, fixed engines for neighbors. There was never any talk of money. Mrs. Gable gave a non-committal shrug. "I don't have the details, just the instructions. Ms. Sharma will explain everything. Be at her office at 2 o'clock. The address is in the envelope, too." She looked at me then, a flicker of something almost like sympathy in her eyes. "Good luck, Leo. Try to stay out of trouble this time." She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust and exhaust. Stay out of trouble. As if the trouble had been a choice I'd made, a path I'd willfully walked down instead of a current that had swept me away. The bus ride was a blur of unfamiliar landscapes. Green hills rolled into flat plains. Small towns flickered past the window like forgotten memories. I was a ghost watching a world I no longer belonged to. Every person who got on the bus seemed to know their destination, their purpose. I was just a boy with a box and a dead man's address. Mill Creek wasn't much of a town. A main street with a handful of storefronts, a post office, and a diner with a faded sign that promised the best pie in the county. The air smelled of wood smoke and rain. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. Ms. Sharma's office was above the hardware store, up a narrow, creaking flight of stairs. The name on the door was etched in frosted glass: Anya Sharma, attorney at law. Inside, the office was small but neat, crammed with filing cabinets and law books that smelled of old paper and leather. A woman looked up from a large wooden desk. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her late 30s, with dark, intelligent eyes and a calm, composed demeanor. "Leo," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm Anya Sharma. Please have a seat." I sat, placing the cardboard box on the floor beside me. It felt foolish, childish. She noticed my gaze and offered a small smile. "Your grandfather, Robert, was a client of mine for many years. More than that, he was a friend." She folded her hands on the desk, her expression turning serious. "He spoke of you often. He was very proud of you, Leo. I want you to know that." Pride was not an emotion I associated with myself. Shame, regret, anger, those were familiar. Pride was a foreign country. "He left you everything," she continued, her voice softening. "The farm, the land, what little savings he had. His will was very clear. You were his sole heir." My heart gave a painful thud. Everything, the house I grew up in before my parents died, the barn where he taught me how to change the oil in a truck, the fields where we'd fly kites on windy days. It was the only real home I had ever known. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, washed over me. He had saved it for me. He had believed I would come back. "But," Ms. Sharma said, and that one word erased everything. "There's a complication." She slid a document across the desk. It was a photocopy, stamped and notarized. 2 months ago, a new will was filed with the county clerk. It was dated a week before Robert's death. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly. I scanned the dense legal text, the words blurring together until 3 names jumped out at me: Mark, Jessica, my cousins, and a final, brutal clause: "And to my grandson, Leo Vance, for reasons known to us all, I leave the sum of $1,000 to be paid upon his 18th birthday and nothing more." Nothing more. The air rushed out of my lungs. It was a lie, a cold, calculated lie. My grandfather would never have written that. He would never have cut me off, not after everything. The letters he sent me were full of hope, full of plans for when I got out. We were going to fix the roof on the barn. We were going to plant a new field of alfalfa. He was waiting for me. "Reasons known to us all," I whispered, the words tasting like poison. It was a direct reference to why I was sent away. A car accident, a stupid, reckless joyride with the wrong people. Someone had died. It wasn't my fault, not entirely, but I was the one who took the fall. The driver was from a wealthy family, and I was a troubled kid living with his grandfather. It was an easy equation for the courts to solve. My cousins had always resented me for it, for the shame I'd brought on the family name. They saw me as a stain, a problem to be managed. "Mark and Jessica filed this," Ms. Sharma explained, her voice low and even. "They claim your grandfather had a change of heart in his final days. They said he was disappointed, that he felt the farm would be wasted on you. According to this document, they are now the primary beneficiaries of the entire estate." Disappointed. The word was a knife. My cousins had used my past, the worst moment of my life, as a weapon against me. They had twisted my grandfather's love into a story of shame and rejection. "It's not true," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in 2 years. In Northwood, rage was a luxury you couldn't afford. It got you solitary, not justice. He wouldn't do that. He wrote to me every week. He was waiting for me. "I believe you, Leo," she said softly. "Robert came to me a year ago, after the accident. He wanted to make sure the original will was ironclad. He was adamant that the farm go to you no matter what. He said it was your anchor, your chance to build a life. The man I knew would not have changed his mind. She leaned forward, her eyes holding mine. The signature on this new will. It looks like his, but the language, the sentiment, it's not him. Your cousins were with him a lot during that last week. They said he was frail, confused. The implication was clear. They had taken advantage of a dying man. They had coerced him, or worse. So what happens now? I asked, a cold dread seeping into my bones. Can we fight it? We can, she confirmed. But it will be difficult and expensive. Contesting a will is a long process. Mark and Jessica have already taken possession of the property. They have the law as it currently stands on their side. We would need to prove undue influence or outright forgery. That requires evidence, Leo, hard evidence, and frankly, we don't have any. I looked down at the box at my feet. My entire life reduced to cardboard and paper. I had nothing. No money, no allies, no home. The $1,000 my cousins had so magnanimously left me would barely cover a month's rent in a rundown apartment. They had already won. They had taken my home, my inheritance, and my grandfather's last words and twisted them into a final act of abandonment. They've already changed the locks, Ms. Sharma added quietly. They sent a notice of eviction. Legally, you have no right to be on the property. The finality of it was crushing. I wasn't just disinherited, I was being erased. I looked out the window at the gray, overcast sky. The world that had seemed so full of terrifying possibility just a few hours ago had shrunk to the size of this small room, to the space between a lie on a piece of paper and a truth I couldn't prove. There is one thing, Ms. Sharma said, pulling me back from the edge. Your cousins haven't moved in. They live in the city. They've hired a local man to check on the place, but it's mostly empty. They plan to sell it. A developer has been sniffing around that area for months, wanting to put up a series of luxury cabins. Sell it? The idea was a physical blow. That land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was my grandfather's sweat, his father's legacy. It was the only place on earth I felt I belonged, and they were going to bulldoze it for money. The anger returned, colder and sharper this time. It wasn't the hot, reckless rage of my youth. This was different. It was the quiet, steely anger of someone with nothing left to lose. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Anya Sharma looked at me, a long, calculating gaze. She was weighing her words, weighing me. Legally, she said, choosing her words carefully, you should find a place to stay in town, and we can start filing the paperwork to contest. It will take months, maybe years. We'll be fighting uphill the entire way. She paused, then leaned forward again, a subtle shift in her posture. But if I were in your shoes, and this is not legal advice, Leo, I would remember that Robert was a man who believed in protecting what was his. He was clever. He didn't trust banks, and he certainly didn't trust your cousins. He always said that the truth has a way of staying put. You just have to know where to dig. She slid a key across the desk. It was old and iron, heavy in my palm. This was in an envelope he left with me for you. The note just said, "For Leo. He'll know which door." It's not a key to the house. Your cousins would have changed those locks immediately. This is for something else. My fingers closed around the cold metal. He'll know which door. My mind raced back through years of memories. The house, the sheds, the root cellar, and the barn. The big red barn with the massive sliding door, and the smaller, sturdy side door leading to the workshop. The door he'd built himself from oak planks, with a heavy, old-fashioned lock he'd salvaged from a church auction. He used to joke that you could survive a tornado in that workshop. The workshop, I said, my voice finding a sliver of strength. In the barn. Anya smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile this time. He said you were a smart kid. He said you remembered things. She stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. Your cousin's caretaker comes by in the mornings to check the perimeter. He doesn't go inside. He's usually gone by 10. The property is isolated, no close neighbors. It wasn't an instruction, but it was a map, a plan. It was a risk, a huge one. If I was caught trespassing, it would be a parole violation. I'd be sent right back to Northwood, this time for longer. My cousins would win definitively. But what was the alternative? To walk away. To let them sell my grandfather's life for a profit and live with the lie that he had abandoned me. To become the person they claimed I was? I stood up, the iron key feeling like a lifeline in my hand. "Thank you," I said. It felt inadequate, but they were the only words I had. "Be careful, Leo," she said, her expression turning serious again. "And be smart. Whatever your grandfather left for you, if he left anything, it won't be in plain sight. And call me the second you find anything at all." I walked out of her office and down the creaking stairs, the weight of the key in my pocket, a tangible thing. The quiet town of Mill Creek suddenly felt different. It wasn't just a bus stop anymore, it was a battleground. The sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. It was a 4-mile walk to the farm. I adjusted the box under my arm and started walking, leaving the town behind. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields of harvested corn. With every step, I felt the numbness of the past 2 years begin to recede, replaced by a sharp, focused resolve. My grandfather had left me a key. He had left me a chance. He was a man who believed you had to know where to dig. And I was going to dig. I was going home. The walk was long, and a cold night wind began to pick up as the last of the light faded from the sky. The familiar shapes of the landscape emerged from the darkness, silhouettes I knew by heart. The crooked oak tree on Miller's Ridge, the gentle curve of the creek that ran along the property line. Finally, I saw it. The long gravel driveway, overgrown with weeds, leading up to the dark shape of the farmhouse and the towering silhouette of the barn against the starry sky. There was a new chain and a heavy padlock on the main gate, a stark, ugly symbol of my cousin's ownership. I slipped through the trees, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, and followed the old deer trail that ran along the back fence. The wire was rusty but intact. I found the spot where my grandfather and I used to crawl under, a place where the earth was worn smooth from years of use. It was still there. I slid under the wire, the damp soil cool against my hands, and stood up on the other side. I was trespassing on my own land. The air here was different too. It smelled of hay and pine and rich soil, the scent of my entire childhood. I moved through the shadows, keeping the tree line at my back, my eyes fixed on the house. It was dark, empty, a hollow shell. The porch swing my grandfather built was still a lonely ghost in the moonlight. I could feel the weight of his absence in the silence. This place was mourning him too. I circled around to the barn. It was even bigger than I remembered, its red paint faded and peeling, the roofline sagging slightly in the middle. It was a tired old giant, patient and waiting. I crept to the side door of the workshop, my breath held tight in my chest. The key slid into the lock with a familiar grating sound. It was stiff from disuse, but with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I turned it. The lock clicked, loud and sharp in the night's silence. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the wind whistling through the eaves. I pushed the heavy oak door open. It groaned in protest, a long, low complaint. The air that rolled out was cool and musty, thick with the smell of sawdust, old oil, and time. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I fumbled along the wall until my fingers found the cold, smooth casing of a flashlight my grandfather always kept on a magnetic hook. I clicked it on. The beam cut a bright circle through the dark, illuminating a space that was exactly as I remembered it. The workbench was still there, cluttered with tools hanging in their designated outlines on the pegboard. Jars of screws, nuts, and bolts lined the shelves. The smell was so familiar it made my throat ache. This was his sanctuary. It was our sanctuary. I swept the light across the room. Everything was coated in a thin layer of dust, but nothing looked disturbed. A stack of old farmer's almanacs sat on a stool. A half-finished birdhouse was clamped in a vise on the bench. It was as if he had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. My eyes fell on the workbench. Tucked beneath a canvas tarp was the familiar shape of his old metal toolbox. But there was something else next to it. A small wooden box about the size of a shoebox with his initials, RV for Robert Vance, burned into the lid. It wasn't locked. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed newspaper clippings, was a stack of envelopes tied together with a piece of twine. On the top envelope, in my grandfather's familiar, steady handwriting, were 2 words, "For Leo." I sat down on the dusty stool, the flashlight beam propped up to illuminate the small wooden box. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, hopeful drumbeat. This was it. This was what Ms. Sharma had been talking about. The truth he'd left for me to find. I untied the twine, my fingers clumsy with cold and anticipation. There were at least a dozen letters, each one in a plain white envelope, numbered in sequence on the corner. I picked up the first one. The paper was thick, the kind he always used. I unfolded it, and the words, written in his strong, familiar script, seemed to leap off the page. "Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. And if you are reading this here in the workshop, it means things have gone wrong. It means Mark and Jessica did what I was afraid they would do. I am sorry, my boy. I am so sorry you have to come home to this fight." The words were a comfort and a confirmation of my worst fears. He knew. He had anticipated their betrayal. He had been trying to protect me even from beyond the grave. "I want you to listen to me carefully," the letter continued. "There is more at stake here than just this land. This is about our name, our history, and your future. I am going to tell you everything. But you must be patient. You must be smart. Don't let your anger get the best of you. That's what they're counting on." I took a deep breath, forcing the hot rage back down. He was right. I had to be calm. I had to think. I continued to read. "First, you need to understand why I agreed to let them send you to Northwood. It was the hardest decision of my life, Leo. It broke my heart every single day you were gone. But you have to believe me when I tell you it was the only way to keep you safe." Safe? How was being locked in a concrete box for 2 years safe? The bitterness rose in me again, sharp and acidic. The boy who was driving the car that night, his father is a powerful man. He made it very clear to me that if you testified, if you told the truth about his son being drunk and behind the wheel, he would make your life a living hell. He threatened to find a way to get you sent to an adult prison, no matter your age. He had the money and the connections to do it. The DA was in his pocket. The choice I was given was 2 years in a juvenile facility, or 10 to 15 in a place that would have destroyed you. I chose the one that would let me get you back. I chose to save your life, even if it meant you would hate me for a while. I had to stop reading. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. I dropped my head into my hands, the rough paper of the letter crinkling against my forehead. All this time I had carried the shame of it, but underneath the shame was a deep, unspoken resentment. I'd felt abandoned. I thought my grandfather, the one person I trusted, had given up on me, had accepted the story that I was just another bad kid. But he hadn't. He had been protecting me. It was a sacrifice, not an abandonment. A raw, ragged sob escaped my throat. I cried for the 2 years I had lost, for the misunderstanding had carried, and for the grandfather who had shouldered a terrible burden all alone, just to keep me safe. It was a grief so profound it felt like it was hollowing me out from the inside. He hadn't been disappointed in me. He had been terrified for me. I finally wiped my eyes on my sleeve and picked up the letter again. Your cousins knew about this. Mark was there for some of those conversations. He saw how scared I was, and he saw an opportunity. He and Jessica have always been jealous of you, of the bond we had. They saw the farm not as a home, but as an asset. They started talking about how much it was worth, about the developers who wanted the land. They started visiting more often, being helpful. It was all an act, Leo. They were waiting for me to get old, to get sick. The letter went on to describe their behavior in the last year of his life, how they would help him with his finances, how they would bring him documents to sign that he was too tired to read. He suspected they were laying a trap. I knew they would try something with the will after I was gone, he wrote. So I made a new plan. The real will, the one that leaves you everything, is safe. Ms. Sharma has a copy, but the original is hidden. You need to find it. It's the only thing that will hold up in court. This workshop is the key to everything. I built secrets into this place, Leo, the same way my father built secrets into the land. You just have to remember the stories I told you. The stories? He was always telling me stories about the farm, about how his grandfather had hidden money from the bank during the Depression, about how his father had built a secret compartment to store his hunting rifles. I had thought they were just tales, fragments of family lore, but they were instructions. They were a map. The letter ended with a simple, powerful message. This farm is your birthright, Leo. It's more than just land. It is a place to be safe, to be whole. It is my legacy to you. Don't let them take it. Don't let them erase us. Be brave. I love you. I folded the letter and placed it carefully back in the box. I wasn't cold anymore. A fire had been lit inside me, a fierce, burning determination. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about justice. It was about honoring the man who had sacrificed everything for me. I picked up the second letter. It was shorter, more direct. Remember the story of the great wind of '78? The big oak that fell and crushed the corner of the barn. I told you how I had to rebuild that entire section of the wall myself. I remembered. He'd been so proud of that repair job. He said he'd made it stronger than the original. He'd used reclaimed wood from an old church. They say a church is built on a strong foundation, he wrote. Look for the cornerstone. I stood up, sweeping the flashlight beam along the corner of the workshop he had rebuilt. The walls were thick planks of oak, dark with age. At the bottom, where the wall met the concrete floor, was a single large block of stone embedded in the foundation. It was different from the rest of the poured concrete, older with chiseled edges. The cornerstone. I knelt down, running my fingers over its cool, rough surface. There was a faint seam along the top edge, almost invisible, filled with decades of dust and grime. I pulled a small screwdriver from the workbench and carefully scraped at the seam. It was mortar, but it was shallow, brittle. It crumbled away easily. Underneath, I could feel a thin line, a crack. I pushed the screwdriver into the gap and pried. The stone didn't move. It was too heavy. I needed leverage. I looked around the workshop, my eyes landing on a long steel crowbar, leaning against the wall. It was heavy, but I wedged the tip into the gap and put all my weight on it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan of protesting wood and stone, the cornerstone shifted. It pivoted inwards, revealing a dark, hollow cavity behind it. I shone the flashlight into the space. Inside was a heavy, fireproof lockbox. My breath caught in my throat. I reached in and pulled it out. It was heavy, solid. There was a keyhole on the front, but there was no key in the wooden box with the letters. I looked at the box, my mind racing. Then it hit me. A key, not a physical one. My grandfather was a man of routines, of numbers. He had been a mechanic in the army. He trusted combinations, not keys that could be lost or stolen. His army serial number, the year he was born, the year he bought the farm. I tried them all. Nothing. I sat back on my heels, frustrated. What was I missing? I thought back to the letters. This is about our name, our history, our name, Vance. I thought about the dates that mattered to us. My birthday, the date my parents died, the date of the accident. It felt wrong, too painful. He wouldn't use that. Then I remembered something else he always used to say. A man is defined by 3 dates, Leo. The day he's born, the day he dies, and the day he truly starts to live. The day he truly starts to live. For him, that was the day he married my grandmother. I remembered the date from the inscription on their wedding photo that always sat on the mantelpiece. 10/24/58, October 24th, 1958. I turned the dial on the lockbox. 102458. I pulled on the latch. With a soft, metallic click, it sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, my grandfather's entire life was laid out in neat, organized bundles. There was the original signed and notarized will, clearly stating that the entire estate was to pass to me. There were bank statements going back years, showing small, regular cash withdrawals. He hadn't been spending it, he had been saving it. And there it was, at the bottom of the box. Stacks of cash wrapped in thick rubber bands, 10s, 20s, 50s. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. A quick count told me it had to be close to $20,000. Tucked into the largest bundle of cash was another note. For the lawyer, it said, truth isn't cheap, son. This is your war chest. Use it to fight for what's ours. But there was something else in the box. Something that made my blood run cold. It was a small, pocket-sized notebook. I opened it. Inside, in my grandfather's handwriting, were dates and notes. He had been documenting every strange conversation with Mark and Jessica, every document they'd asked him to sign, every time they'd mentioned selling the farm. He had been building a case against them from the very beginning. And the last entry, dated 2 days before he died, was the most damning of all. Jessica brought another paper today, said it was for the property taxes. My eyes are tired, and the print is small. I felt dizzy after the tea she made me. I signed it. I hope I haven't made a terrible mistake. He hadn't just been coerced. He had been drugged. They hadn't just taken advantage of a frail old man. They had poisoned him. They had manipulated him into signing away my future while he was in a weakened, altered state. This wasn't just a civil matter of contesting a will anymore. This was a crime. This was proof. Hard, undeniable proof. I closed the lockbox, my hands steady now. The grief and confusion had been burned away, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. I knew what I had to do. I pulled out my phone. It was a cheap, disposable one Mrs. Gable had given me, but it worked. I dialed the number for Anya Sharma. It was late, well after midnight, but she answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert. "Leo, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm more than fine. I found it. I found everything." I heard her let out a long, slow breath. "Don't tell me what it is over the phone. Don't move. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you." The hour I spent waiting for Anya was the longest of my life. I sat in the darkness of the workshop, the lockbox on my lap, the weight of it both a burden and a shield. The silence of the barn was no longer empty. It was filled with the presence of my grandfather, with the echoes of his foresight and his love. I reread his first letter, the words settling into my soul, healing a wound I didn't even know was still so raw. He hadn't abandoned me. He had fought for me in the only way he knew how. He had laid this path for me, a trail of breadcrumbs leading not just to an inheritance, but to the truth. And now, the fight was mine. Headlights cut across the dusty windows of the workshop, and I heard the soft crunch of tires on gravel. I cracked the door open. Anya was getting out of her car, a large travel mug in one hand and a heavy-duty flashlight in the other. She moved with a quiet purpose, her eyes scanning the property. "Are you alone?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. "Yes," I said, letting her in and closing the door behind her. I showed her the open cavity behind the cornerstone, the lockbox on the workbench. I watched her face as she examined the contents. She read the original will, her expression grimly satisfied. She thumbed through the stacks of cash, her eyebrows raising slightly, but when she opened the small notebook and began to read my grandfather's final entries, her composure cracked. A flicker of pure, cold anger crossed her face. "The tea she made me," she read aloud, her voice tight. "This changes everything, Leo. This isn't just undue influence. This could be criminal, elder abuse, fraud, possibly even more." She didn't say the word, but we both knew what she was thinking. Had they done something to hasten his death? The thought was sickening. "This notebook is our smoking gun," she said, her professional calm returning, now sharpened to a razor's edge. "His detailed, dated account of their actions is incredibly powerful, and the money. This gives us the resources to fight them properly. We can hire investigators, we can subpoena their financial records, we can put them under a microscope." She looked at me, her eyes searching my face in the dim light. "This is going to get ugly, Leo. They're not going to give up easily. They'll drag your name through the mud. They'll use your past against you, paint you as a violent, ungrateful delinquent who is trying to steal from them. Are you ready for that?" I thought of the gate at Northwood clicking shut. I thought of 2 years spent staring at concrete walls, believing I was a disappointment. I thought of my grandfather alone in this house, fighting a silent battle against his own family to protect me. "I'm ready," I said, and the words felt truer than anything I had ever said in my life. "What's the first step?" "The first step is we get you and this evidence somewhere safe," she said. "We'll file a motion to contest the will first thing in the morning, along with a request for an emergency injunction to prevent the sale of the property. I'll leak a few details to the local paper about a disputed inheritance with suspicious circumstances. That will put the developers on notice and make them hesitant to close any deal. We need to create doubt to slow them down." We packed everything back into the lockbox. As I was about to close it, my fingers brushed against the newspaper clippings at the bottom. I pulled one out. It was old, yellowed, and brittle. It was my parents' wedding announcement from the Mill Creek Gazette. My grandfather had saved it. He had saved everything. We left the barn as we had found it, the cornerstone back in place, the heavy oak door locked behind us. I spent the rest of the night on a couch in Anya's small, book-filled apartment above her office. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in my mind. I had walked out of a prison that morning, a boy with nothing. Now I was a man with a mission. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and quiet tension. Anya filed the motions, and just as she predicted, the news of the contested will sent ripples through the small town. The sale of the farm was put on hold. My cousins, Mark and Jessica, were furious. The phone call came a week later. It was Anya telling me Mark wanted to speak with me. She advised against it, but I knew I had to face him. We met in her office, the same room where my world had fallen apart and then been pieced back together. Mark was older than I remembered, his face puffy and his eyes small and hard. He had the overconfident swagger of a man who had always gotten his way. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Look, kid," he started, leaning across the table, his voice a low, threatening growl. I don't know what kind of game you and this small-town lawyer think you're playing, but it's over. We have a legal will. You have nothing." "I have the truth," I said, my voice steady. Anya had coached me. "Keep it simple. Don't show emotion. Don't reveal what you know." Mark laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The truth? The truth is you're a screw-up who got a man killed and broke your grandfather's heart. He was ashamed of you. In the end, he knew we were the only ones who could be trusted to handle his legacy." His words were meant to be daggers, but they glanced off the armor of my grandfather's letters. I knew the real truth. "He was a good man," I said quietly. "He deserved better." "He deserved to have his final wishes respected," Mark shot back, "and his final wish was to cut you out. Now, we're prepared to be generous. The developer is getting antsy, and we want this cleared up. We'll give you $25,000. Cash. You sign a paper saying you'll drop this contest and you walk away. That's 5 times what you would have gotten." Anya sat silently, observing, letting me handle it. The offer was tempting. $25,000 was a fortune. I could go anywhere, start a new life, leave all of this behind. It was the easy way out, the safe way, but it would mean letting them win. It would mean letting their lies become the official story. It would mean my grandfather's sacrifice, his fight, would be for nothing. It would mean selling his memory for cash. I looked at Mark, at his smug, entitled face, and I saw the greed my grandfather had warned me about. He wasn't just trying to buy my silence. He was trying to buy my complicity in his lie. He wanted me to agree that our grandfather had abandoned me, and that was a price I was not willing to pay. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the room. Mark's face darkened. "What did you say?" "The farm is not for sale," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "And neither am I." For a moment he looked genuinely stunned. He had expected me to be a broken, desperate kid who would jump at the money. He didn't see a person with a purpose. He saw a problem he could buy off. "You're making a huge mistake," he snarled. "We will bury you in legal fees. We'll show the court exactly who you are. By the time we're done, you'll wish you had taken the deal." He stood up, knocking his chair back slightly, and stormed out of the office. The door slammed shut behind him. The silence he left behind was heavy. I looked at Anya. Did I do the right thing? She had a small, proud smile on her face. "You did the hard thing, Leo. And that's almost always the right thing. Now the real fight begins." Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, you've probably faced a moment like that. A moment where the easy path is right there in front of you, shining and simple, and the right path is uphill, covered in thorns, with no guarantee of a good view at the end. It's a choice that defines you. It's the moment you decide what you're really made of. So many of us are told to take the deal, to cut our losses, to be realistic, but sometimes being realistic is just another way of giving up. Have you ever had to make a choice like that? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories matter. They're a reminder that none of us are alone in these fights. This community is built on people who chose the harder path because their integrity wasn't for sale. Now, let's get back to what happened after I told my cousin no. The fight got ugly, just as Anya had predicted. Mark and Jessica's lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to bleed us dry. They subpoenaed my juvenile records, painting me in court filings as a dangerous and unstable young man with a history of violence. They got affidavits from distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, all of them attesting to my troubled nature and my grandfather's deep disappointment. They were trying to build a narrative, a story where their actions seemed reasonable, even necessary. But we had the truth, and we had my grandfather's notebook. Anya used the money he'd left to hire a private investigator, a former cop named Sal, who had a knack for digging up financial dirt. Sal discovered that both Mark and Jessica were in serious debt. Mark had a string of failed businesses and Jessica had a gambling problem. They weren't trying to protect a legacy, they were trying to cash in on a lifeline. They were desperate. We also had the notebook forensically analyzed. A handwriting expert confirmed every entry was written by my grandfather. A toxicologist reviewed the final entry and stated that the symptoms he described, dizziness, confusion, were consistent with a number of sedatives that could be easily dissolved in tea. While we couldn't prove what was in that specific cup, it established a pattern of behavior and a credible medical possibility that supported our claim of undue influence. The legal battle dragged on for months. I moved into a small rented room in town and got a job washing dishes at the local diner. It was humbling, exhausting work, but it was honest. It kept me grounded. The people in Mill Creek were wary of me at first. They'd heard the rumors. But slowly, as the weeks turned into months, they started to see me not as a headline, but as a person. The owner of the diner, a woman named Carol, would save me a slice of pie at the end of my shift. The guy at the hardware store started giving me a discount on supplies. They were small gestures, but they were everything. They were a community quietly choosing a side. I spent my days off at the farm. I couldn't go in the house, but I could walk the land. I mended fences, I cleared brush from the creek. I sat in the open doorway of the barn and just breathed, feeling my grandfather's presence in the quiet strength of the place. I was taking care of it, protecting it, just as he had. It was my home, and I was fighting for it not with lawyers in a courtroom, but with my own two hands. The turning point came during the deposition phase. Anya had Mark and Jessica brought in for questioning. Separately, she started with Jessica. She was calm, methodical, asking about their finances, their visits to my grandfather. Jessica stuck to her story, portraying herself as a loving, concerned niece. Then Anya brought out the notebook. She asked Jessica to read the final entry aloud. Jessica's face went pale as she read the words about the tea. "Your uncle was a man of routine," Anya said, her voice soft but insistent. "He drank the same black tea every afternoon, but on this day he mentions you making it for him. He also mentions feeling dizzy and confused. Can you explain that?" Jessica stammered, claiming he was just old, that he was getting forgetful. But the lie was thin and her composure was gone. Then Anya produced the evidence Sal had uncovered. Records of Jessica's large cash withdrawals from ATMs near a casino an hour away. Records that showed she was on the verge of losing her house. When it was Mark's turn, Anya took a different approach. She showed him the financial analysis, his failed businesses, the loans he had defaulted on. She showed him that we knew he was desperate. Then she presented him with a choice. "We can take this to a jury, Mr. Vance," she said. "We can present the notebook, the financial records, the toxicologist's report. We can talk about the tea. The local paper will have a field day with it. A jury in this county, a jury of your uncle's neighbors, will hear how you and your sister treated a dying man. Or we can settle this right now." Mark was a bully, but he wasn't stupid. He saw the box he was in. He tried to bluster, to threaten, but the fight had gone out of him. He knew he was caught. 2 days later, they agreed to a settlement. It wasn't a total victory. I didn't get everything. To avoid a public criminal investigation, which they were terrified of, they agreed to sign over the farmhouse and 10 acres of the surrounding land, including the barn and the pastures, free and clear. They would sell the remaining back acreage to the developer, allowing them to pay off their debts and disappear. Anya advised me to take it. A trial would be a gamble, and this settlement gave me what mattered most. It gave me my home. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a compromise born from pain and struggle. But it was real. The day I signed the papers, I walked out of Anya's office and didn't stop walking until I reached the farm. The chain was gone from the gate. I walked up the long driveway, a key to the front door, a new key in my hand. The house was musty and silent, filled with dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. My cousins had taken some of the furniture, the valuable pieces, but they had left the soul of the place intact. My grandfather's worn armchair was still by the fireplace. His wedding photo was still on the mantel. I spent the next year bringing the place back to life. I used the rest of the money he had left me to fix the roof and update the wiring. I worked 2 jobs at the diner and doing odd jobs for other farmers in the area, saving every penny. I painted the house, planted a garden, and started raising a few chickens. It was hard, relentless work, but every swing of the hammer, every seed I planted in the ground felt like a prayer. It was an act of reclamation. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was rebuilding my life. I was putting down roots in the only soil that had ever felt like home. The community in Mill Creek, the one that had watched me with suspicion, slowly embraced me. They saw the work I was putting in. They saw that I was honoring my grandfather's legacy, not squandering it. Carol from the diner started bringing me leftover produce for my chickens. The hardware store owner let me buy on credit when money was tight. They became the family I had lost. They saw me for who I was, not for the mistakes of my past. My life isn't perfect. There are scars. The memory of those 2 years in Northwood never completely fades. The betrayal of my cousins left a wound that will always be a part of me. But the farm healed me in ways I never thought possible. It gave me a purpose. It gave me a connection to my past and a foundation for my future. Sometimes late at night, I sit in my grandfather's armchair by the fire and I read his letters again. They remind me that inheritance isn't about what you're given in a will. It's about the values you're taught, the love you're shown, and the strength you're given to fight for what's right. He didn't just leave me a farm. He left me a second chance. He taught me that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you build, a place you defend, a place you earn. He taught me that the truth, no matter how deep you bury it, has a way of finding the light, and that the hardest fights are the ones that lead you back to yourself. What this story taught me, what this whole journey forced me to understand, is that our past doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a classroom. The things that break us can also be the things that make us stronger, more compassionate, more determined. The world might try to write a story about you, to label you as a failure or a delinquent or a lost cause. But you are the only one who holds the pen. You get to write the ending. Your story is not over just because you stumbled on a difficult chapter. Maybe you're in a fight right now. Maybe you're facing a choice or a betrayal or a loss that feels insurmountable. I want you to know that you are not alone. The strength that you need is already inside you. It's in the lessons you've learned, in the love you remember, in the hope for a future you can build with your own 2 hands. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength and resilience, please subscribe and become a part of this community. Share your own story in the comments. We read them and we learn from them, because every story of survival is a roadmap for someone else who is still trying to find their way home. You matter, your fight matters, and your story deserves to be heard.